I'm Tyler Austin from Gunleader Strategic. Thank you so much for watching. In this video, I'm going to go over entry types for CQB. Now, I can already hear some people saying that there's two of them, dynamic and deliberate. That is not true. Dynamic and deliberate are a set of tactics. They're not an entry type. Now, with that being said, of course, entries can either be more dynamic or deliberate. However, dynamic and deliberate in of themselves are not entries. They're just a set of tactics. Now, with that being said, let's just go ahead and define what an entry is. So an entry is a method in which we are gaining physical positioning in the room while also, generally speaking, attacking the isolated, uncleared corner or corners within the room. So it's just a method of gaining physical positioning in the room while also, again, generally attacking the isolated, uncleared corner or corners. Now, with that being said, I categorize entries into 5 different types: conventional, lateral, framing, slice, and direct to threat. Now, the purpose of this video is going to be primarily just to define them. There's a lot of nuance as to why you would use one or the other and the pros and cons of each one. I'm going to make specific videos on each entry type, talking about why you would use that particular entry type. However, again, this particular video is just going to be about defining them for now. So let's first start with a conventional entry. A conventional entry is where you make entry and you run close and parallel to the wall that the door is attached to. This is going to very commonly be referred to as strong walling in the industry. The strong wall, quote unquote, is the wall that the door is attached to, simply speaking. So you are going to run close and parallel with the strong wall. Now, you can do this a few different ways. I recommend you follow the limited penetration principle. So what that would look like is you would make entry and take 1, maybe 2 steps away from the door, and then you'd perform your secondary scan. If you're running points of domination, which I generally don't recommend, but it is another method, when you make entry, you're going to run parallel along that wall until you reach your corner, secondary scan. But either way, that is a conventional entry. If you are split on the door and you're both doing conventionals, it would look something like that. So that is a conventional entry. Moving on from there, we have lateral entries. Now, there are 2 different types of lateral entries. There's 90-degree laterals and 45-degree laterals. So a lateral entry is where you're no longer running parallel to the strong wall. You are moving in a more lateral direction. Again, either 90-degree or 45-degree, generally speaking. So a 90-degree lateral would look something like this, and a 45-degree lateral would look something like this. Now, generally speaking, 90-degree laterals are going to be reserved for corner-fed rooms or center-fed rooms in which a corner is a very high-threat corner. So, for example, if this is a corner-fed room, right, we have this wall here. I know someone's going to be a smart ass. Put on your imaginary caps. This wall goes all the way up. So this is a corner-fed room. There's nothing to worry about. This corner is no factor, right? So a 90-degree is great for corner-fed rooms. On the other hand, you can also run 90-degree laterals in a center-fed room in the event that there's a corner that's a very high-risk corner, high-threat corner. So if we have a very high degree of certainty that there is somebody sitting in this corner, whether because we heard them or whatever the case, we just have a high degree. So if we believe that there's a high degree of likelihood that there is somebody sitting in this corner, meaning that this corner has now become a very high threat corner, this can also be a good option to run a 90-degree lateral. Now, of course, there are other means of potentially taking that, like, for example, flying a drone into there, to go take a look. But, regardless of that, this would be a good option for a 90-degree lateral. So 90-degree, again, would look something like that, and then this guy would take this corner. Now, 90-degree laterals are also commonly referred to as running the rabbit, okay? So if you hear running the rabbit, they're probably referring to a 90-degree lateral. Then we have 45-degree laterals, which are also very useful for center-fed rooms. So a 45-degree lateral is instead of running a 90 degree, you're going to run 45 degrees from the strong wall or the doorway. Now, this is very useful in center-fed rooms because you get a very similar effect to running the rabbit. However, you're not penetrating so deep center of the room as you will with a 90 degree. Also, you're going to follow the limited penetration principle with this. So if you run a 45 and you just keep going even though this corner is clear, that's wrong. You don't do that. If you make entry and you run that 45 degree and that corner is clear, you're only taking 2, maybe 3 steps away from the threshold at that 45 degree angle and stopping and beginning your secondary scan. And then this guy would just make entry however he's going to make entry. Now the benefit of running that 45 degree lateral is, again, you get a very similar effect to running the rabbit, except you're not penetrating so deep center of the room. So in the event, let's say there's someone in this corner, right, and you run a conventional entry, what you'll see a lot, and force on force especially, is that when the number 1 man makes entry, this guy in the corner goes to engage him. However, the number 2 man steps in and eats the rounds that were intended for the number 1 man. That's actually very common, and you see that a lot in force on force. So 45 degree laterals are meant to mitigate that as much as possible, because when this guy runs a 45, he is driving the potential threat's muzzle away from the doorway, and which is going to give the number 2 man a better survivability rate. So he's not just running in line to fire that's intended for the number 1 man. This can also work in the opposite. So if the number 1 man picked right, so to speak, when it came to the corner, he runs this 45, he's making it harder for this guy to engage him because he's running laterally rather than parallel and towards him. Right? This is not a hard engagement for this, for the op 4 in this corner, right? Because you're just stepping into the doorway and basically directly in front of him with a conventional entry, as opposed to running this 45 where now you're running laterally. Also, like I said, if this corner is clear, right, you're going to take 2, maybe 3 steps away from that doorway. You're more or less going to have about a body width, give or take, away from the wall, and then you're going to stop and begin your secondary scan if the corner is clear. However, in the event that there is a threat there and you make entry and there's a threat, you're going to keep going. You're not going to stop, right? So you're going to keep running that 45 and keep engaging that, that threat in the corner. So in the event that there is a threat in the corner, you keep moving at a 45 degree. You don't stop. But if the corner is clear, you take 2 or 3 steps in, stop, and perform your secondary scan. So that is a lateral entry. Moving on from there, we have something called framing. Now, framing, or doing a frame, is where you attack a isolated unclear corner from the door frame rather than making a full commitment to the room. So it looks something like that. Now, the main benefit to a frame is that it's basically the most limited penetration form of entry there is, because I am not fully committing to this room. I'm just stepping through the threshold just far enough to where I can see and clear the isolated corner. Now, the main benefit to a frame is, well, there's multiple. Number one, I am not fully exposing myself to whatever may lie in that corner. So I am maintaining good concealment from the threshold while taking that corner. So if I step in and do a conventional, I am fully exposed to whatever threat may lie in that corner, right? They can see my entire body. But however, if I snap a frame, they're only going to be able to see a relatively small portion of my body, but I can see probably all of them. So I'm maintaining good concealment from the threshold. Now, also another main benefit of snapping frames is that this is the only entry type in which you can still bail out of the room if need be. With any other type of entry, you are fully committing to the room. There's no going back. Once you make entry, there's no bailing back out of the room. You can't just conventional entry, oh, I don't want to be here, and then turn around and run out of the room. You can't do that. However, if I hit a frame and I decide that I see something in this corner that I don't want to be there, I can still say, fuck this shit, I'm out, and bail out of the room. So it's the only entry type in which you maintain the ability to bail out of the room in the event that you need or want to bail. Framing is super valuable not only in solo CQB, but also team CQB as well. It's not utilized nearly enough. It's very nice when attacking corner-fed rooms because even if you are split on this door, right, there's a wall here, so there's no reason why, unless I'm going to run a lateral, right, that I need to fully commit to the room to attack this corner, right? I can just simply frame this and attack this corner, and then we can make entry from there. So framing is extremely valuable, and unfortunately it's underutilized, especially in a team context. There's a lot of benefits to framing. Another one, again, I'm going to do a specific video specifically on framing along with all the other entry methods. But another big benefit to framing is that you can attack a corner without fully committing to the room and exposing yourself to deeper angles from follow-on danger areas like dead space, open doors, etc. So that's another big benefit to it. Anyways, that's framing. Next, we have something called slice entries. Now, I'm not going to spend too much time on these because I'm generally just not a big fan of them. They do have uses, and they're certainly valid in certain situations and contexts, but they're fairly niche. So what slice entries are is that basically you have to be split stacked, and what's going to go on is these two guys are going to slice out the room relatively simultaneously, which that in of itself can be a problem. Not necessarily a big fan of that, but that's besides the point of the video. Regardless, they're going to slice out to the 90 degree relatively simultaneously. Once they hit the 90 degree, what they're going to do is they're more or less going to go back to back, and they're going to try to take these corners at the same time, and then they'll make entry. So that is a slice entry. You see that a lot, at least in the past, from Israel. They were big fans of that, and they kind of made those popular. Again, I'm not saying that they're necessarily wrong. In standard doorways, they're hard to do. Getting two guys back to back and trying to squeeze them through a door frame, especially when they're wearing kit, can be rather difficult, if not impossible. Managing your exposure can be pretty hard with it too. I'm just generally not a big fan of them. However, there are times where they can be valuable, especially in wider doorways. Like if you have a double door, they can be certainly valuable there. And there are other times, especially in the use of a shield, they can be valuable. So they do have their niche purposes, but generally speaking, their use is relatively limited, and there's definitely some downsides to it. So I'll just leave it at that. So that is a slice entry. And finally, the last entry type is something I call directed threat. Now, directed threat means different things within the industry. However, I like to call these directed threat entries, and you'll see why. So these are more going to be irregular entries when you are prioritizing a certain high-risk area within the room over normally how you would attack the room. So let's just, for example, let's say we have a half wall here, and as this guy was slicing out his angles, he engaged somebody that was on the edge of this dead space. Maybe he bailed back over here, maybe he fell and collapsed back into this dead space. Whatever's the case, this area right here just became a very, very high risk area in this room. So when doing a directed threat entry, this guy is going to ask for priority to take this because this is his known. This follows the known to known principle. So what he's going to do is he's going to ask for priority to attack this, and he's going to make entry and attack this dead space over here, and this guy is going to, number two man is going to attack the corner. So conventionally, this corner would be attacked first before working the dead space, but because this dead space became such a high risk area, the number one man prioritized it over the corner, right? So that's why I call it direct to threat. It's the prioritization of a particular area within the room that otherwise would be dealt at least secondary upon entry, because it became such a high-risk area. These are, again, very contextual and somewhat niche. However, these type of entries are extremely important and extremely valuable when you understand when to implement them. So that is a direct-to-threat entry. Anyway, so those are the 5 different entry types. I'm going to make specific videos for each one, going into more detail on how and why you would use each one of them. So definitely keep your eyes out for those. I hope you found this video helpful and informative. If you did, please like and subscribe. I'm Tyler Austin from Gungnir Strategic. Thank you so much for watching.